My name is Carol, I'm 68 years old, and on the day I was supposed to watch my only son get married, I found my own face on a security blacklist with the words "Do not admit." Before I tell you how I turned their dream wedding into their worst financial nightmare, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Today was supposed to be the proudest day of my life. The California sun felt warm on my shoulders as I pulled my old Honda into the sprawling parking lot of the Napa Valley Meadow Resort. Every spot was filled with gleaming luxury cars, a testament to the event I had poured my entire life savings into. This was it. The day my son Mark would marry Tiffany, my only child. The boy I had raised on my own after his father passed away, using every cent of the life insurance, every dollar from my teacher's salary, to give him the world. I had even dipped into what was left of my inheritance to make sure this day was perfect. I smoothed down my navy blue dress, the one I'd spent weeks searching for, and took a deep breath. The scent of roses and fresh-cut grass hung in the air. In the distance I could hear the soft, elegant melody of a cello, the string quartet I had personally vetted and paid for. A wave of emotion washed over me. It was all worth it, every sacrifice, just to see the look on Mark's face. As I walked toward the grand archway leading to the ceremony lawn, I felt a flutter of nerves. I saw a few familiar faces, Mark's colleagues, some distant cousins, who gave me brief, almost awkward waves before quickly looking away. I chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters. Everyone feels a little strange on days like these. But as I reached the entrance, a tall man in a crisp black suit stepped into my path. He had an earpiece and the polite, unyielding expression of professional security. "Good afternoon, ma'am. May I see your invitation?" he asked, his voice flat. I chuckled, feeling a little flustered. "Oh, I don't think I have one. I'm Carol, the mother of the groom." I smiled, expecting him to break into a welcoming grin and wave me through. He didn't. His expression remained unchanged. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I need to see an invitation. Everyone needs one. There must be some mistake," I said, my smile faltering. I'm the one who paid for all of this. The venue, the flowers, everything." I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. A few guests milling nearby had turned to watch, their curiosity piqued. "If you could just step over here for a moment, ma'am," the guard said, gesturing toward a small table set off to the side. His tone was still professional, but now it held a note of finality. My heart started to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. What was going on? This had to be a silly mix-up. Mark probably just forgot to tell them his own mother was coming. The guard picked up a cheap, brown clipboard from the table. It wasn't a guest list. It was a single sheet of paper. And clipped to the top, stark and undeniable, was my photo. It was a cheap color printout, the kind you get from a drugstore kiosk. They'd taken it at Mark and Tiffany's engagement party 6 months ago. In the photo I was beaming, my arm wrapped around my son, my eyes shining with unspeakable pride. But someone had taken that moment of pure joy and twisted it into this. A mugshot. And beneath my smiling face, typed in bold, unforgiving letters, were the words, "Do not admit under any circumstances." The world went silent. The music, the distant laughter, the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. It all faded into a dull, roaring hum in my ears. It felt like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole all the air from my lungs. I reached out a hand to steady myself against the table, my fingers trembling. "No," I whispered. "No, this is a mistake. A joke." The guard looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of pity in his eyes. "Ma'am, my instructions are very clear. They come directly from the bride and groom." The bride and groom. My son. My Mark. I just stood there, frozen, not by the California breeze, but by the cold, hard truth of my son's betrayal. Guests in pastel dresses and crisp suits floated past me, their curious glances feeling like tiny needles on my skin. They were walking into a celebration I had funded, a party from which I was now an outcast. The music I'd chosen, the soft melody of the cello, drifted over the manicured lawns. A sound that was supposed to fill my heart now felt like a mockery. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion, of raw, blinding pain. Why would my own son do this? It made no sense. He had just called me 2 days ago, telling me how excited he was, how much he appreciated everything I'd done. He told me he loved me. And then, like a shard of ice piercing through the fog, I remembered. The email. My breath hitched. My vision cleared. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a joke. It was a plan. And I had been too blind with love to see it coming. My mind reeled back 2 weeks. I was in my small condo, the one I moved into after selling our family home to help Mark with the down payment for his. I was sipping my morning coffee, scrolling through my inbox when a new message popped up. The sender was Tiffany. The subject line read, "Wedding update urgent." I remember thinking it was for the wedding planner, Amanda, and that she just copied me in to keep me in the loop. I opened it, my eyes scanning the list of recipients. The wedding planner, the florist, and me. I remember thinking it was odd to be CC'd, not be CC'd on a message with logistical details. A simple mistake, I'd thought. A slip of the finger. But it wasn't. I scrolled down past the details about the final floral arrangements and the updated seating chart. My eyes landed on a paragraph near the bottom, a note clearly intended only for the planner. My hand flew to my mouth, a strangled gasp caught in my throat. I read the line again and then a third time, the words burning themselves into my brain. "Just let the old hag sign the final checks for the orchestra and flowers, Amanda. Once the transfer's clear, you make sure security has her photo. We can't have her wandering around with her sob stories and ruining the aesthetic. Mark is on board. He said he'll handle the fallout later." Old hag. The words echoed in the cavern of my mind, drowning out everything else. Standing there by the security table, with the Napa sun beating down on me, I wasn't in the present anymore. I was back in my quiet little condo 2 weeks ago. The floral scent of my window box garden filling the air, my favorite ceramic mug warm in my hands. I remember the little ping from my laptop. An email. From Tiffany. My heart had given a little flutter of affection. She was probably sharing a picture of her final dress fitting. But the subject line was businesslike. "Wedding update urgent." I clicked it open, a small smile on my face, ready for another task, another check to write. My eyes scanned the recipient list. Amanda, the planner. Maria, the florist. And me, Carol, right there on the CC line. A simple mistake, I'd thought. A slip of the finger in her pre-wedding rush. The first part of the email was normal. Logistics. Confirming the delivery time for the 5-tier cake, the one with the hand-piped sugar flowers that cost more than my first car. A question about the string quartet's playlist. I had almost closed it, ready to reply with a cheerful "sounds wonderful, dear." But my eyes drifted to the bottom. A final paragraph clearly meant only for the planner. My blood ran cold then, and it was running cold now, standing here like a criminal at my own son's wedding. I can still see the words as if they were branded on the inside of my eyelids. "Just let the old hag sign the final checks for the orchestra and flowers, Amanda. Once the transfer's clear, you make sure security has her photo. We can't have her wandering around with her sob stories about her dead husband and ruining the aesthetic. Mark is on board. He said he'll handle the fallout later." I remember my hand shaking so violently that hot coffee sloshed over the rim of my mug, scalding my fingers. But I didn't feel it. The only thing I felt was a deep, glacial cold spreading through my chest. It wasn't just the insult, as cruel as it was. It was the calculation, the cold reptilian planning of it all. They were waiting for my money. My money from the inheritance my late husband, Tom, had left for me, the nest egg I was supposed to live on for the rest of my days. They were waiting for it to clear, and then they were going to throw me away like a piece of trash. And Mark was on board. Suddenly, other things, little moments I'd dismissed, started clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The rehearsal dinner just last night, held at a ridiculously expensive restaurant run by one of Tiffany's father's friends. I had worn my best dress, a simple but elegant deep blue silk. When I arrived, Tiffany had looked me up and down, a barely concealed sneer on her perfectly made-up face. In front of her parents and a dozen of their friends, she'd said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, Carol, that's a classic choice. I didn't know they still made that color." Her mother had tittered behind her hand. I felt my face burn with humiliation, but Mark just stared down at his plate, meticulously cutting his steak into tiny pieces, refusing to meet my eyes. I thought he was just nervous. But he wasn't nervous. He was complicit. He was letting her sharpen her knives on me before the final blow. And then another memory, even more sinister, surfaced. About a month ago, they had sat me down in my own living room, all smiles and concern. They brought a stack of papers with them. "Mom," Mark had said, his voice oozing with false sincerity, "we were just thinking, with your health it would be smart to get a power of attorney set up, just in case of an emergency, so I can handle your finances if you ever can't." Tiffany had chimed in, placing a cold hand on my arm. "We just worry about you, Carol. We want to make sure you're taken care of." Something about it felt wrong. A little alarm bell went off in the back of my mind. Felt too formal, too clinical. I told them I'd think about it, that I'd need to have my lawyer look it over. Mark's smile tightened just a fraction. Tiffany had withdrawn her hand as if she'd touched something unpleasant. They had dropped it, but now, standing in the harsh sunlight of my public humiliation, I knew. It was all connected. They didn't just want my money for the wedding. They wanted everything. The memory faded, and I was back at the resort, the pitying face of the security guard swimming into focus. The sounds of the party came rushing back. The happy, oblivious sounds of a celebration built on my money and my love. My son was going to handle the fallout. A strange thing happened then. The crushing weight on my chest, the feeling of being hollowed out and discarded, began to recede. And in its place something else rose up. It wasn't rage. It was colder, harder, and clearer than that. It was steel. The steel of a woman who had been a teacher for 40 years, who had managed budgets, raised a child alone, and buried a husband. The steel of a woman who was done being treated like a doormat. I gave the security guard a small, tight smile. Probably looked ghastly. "Thank you," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I understand completely." Without another word, I turned around. I didn't look back. I walked, head held high, past the curious stares and whispered comments. I walked past the rows of gleaming cars, my sensible orthopedic shoes clicking on the hot pavement. I got into my 10-year-old Honda, a car I'd kept so I could afford to give Mark the best of everything. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, the keys digging into my palm. The plan was simple. They had treated me like a bank. An ATM with a heartbeat. It was time to show them what happens when the bank closes. I pulled out my phone. My fingers were perfectly still as I scrolled through my contacts. I didn't call Mark. I didn't call my sister to cry on her shoulder. I called David Chun, the manager at my local bank, a kind man who had handled my accounts since Tom passed away. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and professional. "Carol, what a surprise. Shouldn't you be at a wedding right now? Congratulations are in order." "Hello, David," I said, my voice as calm and cool as a winter morning. "Yes, about that wedding. There's been a change of plans." I could hear the slight confusion in his silence. "David," I continued, "I need you to do something for me immediately. I need you to place a stop payment on every single check and scheduled transfer from my accounts. Effective immediately." "Every single one?" he asked, a note of alarm in his voice. "Carol, there are some very large amounts scheduled to clear on Monday morning. For the Napa Valley Meadow Resort, the caterers." "Yes, David," I interrupted gently. "Especially those." There was a pause. I could hear the faint clicking of his keyboard. David knew my financial history. He knew this wedding was the culmination of my life savings. He didn't ask what was wrong. He was too professional for that. "Consider it done, Carol," he said finally, his voice now laced with a quiet concern. "The transfers are frozen. The checks will be returned. Is everything all right?" A small mirthless smile touched my lips. "Everything is finally becoming very clear, David. Thank you." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My eyes were clear. My face was set. The heartbroken mother who had arrived an hour ago was gone. In her place was someone else. Someone they had created. They wanted a wedding without me. Fine. They were about to get exactly what they paid for, nothing. I didn't go home. I couldn't bear the thought of sitting in my silent condo, surrounded by memories of the boy I thought I knew. Instead, I drove 10 miles down the road to a little roadside diner, the kind with cracked red vinyl booths and a waitress who calls everyone Han. I ordered a cup of black tea and a slice of apple pie I had no intention of eating. I just needed a place to be. A place that wasn't mine and wasn't theirs. I sat there stirring my tea, watching the steam curl into the air. The piece lasted exactly 47 minutes. My phone, sitting on the table beside my plate, buzzed. It was a text from Mark. Mom, caterer's asking about the final payment. Said the bank transfer was frozen. Can you call them? I ignored it. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. It was scalding hot. 2 minutes later, another buzz. Mom, seriously. The wedding planner is here. She looks furious. What's going on? I picked up my fork and pushed a few crumbs of pie crust around my plate. Third buzz, more frantic this time. The photographer just packed up his gear and left. He said no pay, no pictures. Pick up your phone. The phone began to ring. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He called back immediately. I let it go again. On the third try, I decided it was time. I answered, holding the phone slightly away from my ear. What did you do? His voice wasn't just panicked, it was a shriek. In the background, I could hear chaos. Raised voices, the sound of a woman crying, which I guessed was Tiffany. Hello, Mark, I said calmly, as if he were calling to ask about the weather. How's your special day going? How's it? Mom, you've ruined everything. The caterers are leaving. The band is refusing to play. Amanda is threatening to sue us. Did you cancel the payments? Why would you do that? I took another sip of tea. Mark, I simply updated the vendors on the current payment authorization status. Since I was, as you know, uninvited from the event, I assumed my financial obligations were also no longer welcome. I used the most detached, businesslike tone I could muster. Uninvited? What are you talking about? It was just, we thought it would be less stressful for you. He stammered, the lie sounding pathetic even to his own ears. Oh, it is, I replied breezily. It's remarkably less stressful. You and Tiffany were right. My stress levels have plummeted. I hope yours are manageable. There was a sputtering sound on the other end of the line, then a muffled exchange. The phone was snatched away. You vindictive old witch. Tiffany's voice, sharp and venomous, cut through the line. You couldn't stand not being the center of attention for one day, could you? You had to ruin it all. Tiffany dear, I said, my voice dripping with mock sweetness. I'm just respecting your wishes. You didn't want me there, remember? I'm respecting your boundaries. And my own bank account. My parents are here. Our friends are here. Everyone is watching this disaster. You've humiliated us, she screamed. Now you know how it feels, I said softly and hung up the phone. I placed it face down on the table. My heart was hammering, but my hands were steady. The waitress came by and refilled my tea. Rough day, hon? She asked, her kind, tired eyes looking at me with sympathy. You have no idea, I murmured. The pie remained untouched. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. Carol? It's Eleanor. Tiffany's mother. Her voice was low and dangerous, like a cornered animal. I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but you need to call it off. Now. Hello, Eleanor, I said. I'm not playing any games. I'm simply managing my own retirement funds. You are making a spectacle, she hissed. You are embarrassing my daughter. You are embarrassing my family. After everything we've done to welcome you. I almost laughed. Welcome me? She had treated me like something she'd scraped off her shoe since the day we met. Eleanor, the only spectacle here is a wedding for 300 people that was funded by a woman your daughter planned to ban at the door. You want to talk about embarrassment? Let's talk about that. Tiffany was just stressed. You know how brides get. You're taking this far too personally. You're being selfish. Selfish. The word hit me. For 40 years, my entire life had revolved around other people, my husband, my son, my students. I had never, not once, put myself first. You know what, Eleanor? I said, a sudden wave of clarity washing over me. You're right. For the first time in my life, I am being selfish. And it feels wonderful. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lovely cup of tea to finish. Please give my regrets to the happy couple. I hung up before she could reply. You know, the funny thing is, I thought that was the worst of it. The screaming, the insults. I thought the battle was over. But I was so wrong. The next call was the one that showed me this wasn't just about a ruined wedding. It was about something much, much darker. The phone rang one more time. It was the band leader, a nice young man named Marcus. His voice was stressed but professional. Mrs. Miller? It's Marcus from the Midnight Grooves. Listen, there's a lot of chaos here. The wedding planner said there's a payment issue. We're contracted to play until midnight, but... He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. Marcus, I said gently. It's not your fault. None of this is. Did they treat you and your band members well? There was a pause. To be honest, ma'am, the bride and her mother have been incredibly rude. The atmosphere is toxic. We just want to do our job and get paid. I understand, I said. And you will be. Just not by them. I want you to pack up your equipment and go home. Right now. Take your boys and go be with your families. This is not a party you want to be at. But ma'am, the contract. The contract is with me and I'm voiding it, I said. Send me an invoice for your time and trouble. A cancellation fee. I'll pay it personally. You and your band did nothing wrong, and you shouldn't be subjected to this mess. I could hear the relief in his voice. Thank you, Mrs. Miller. Thank you. And for what it's worth, I'm really sorry. I don't know what happened, but what they did to you. It just doesn't feel right. Thank you, Marcus, I said, my voice thick with emotion for the first time that day. That means a lot. When I hung up, the diner felt quiet. The storm of frantic calls had passed. But it was the silence that followed that told me the real battle was about to begin. They were regrouping, and I knew their next move wouldn't be a phone call. It would be an attack. The next morning, the attack came. It wasn't a knock on my door or another angry phone call. It was quieter, more insidious, and far more public. My niece was the first one to alert me. She sent me a text at 7 a.m. with a link and a single sentence. Aunt Carol, you need to see this. I clicked the link and my stomach dropped. It was Tiffany's Facebook page. She had posted a long, rambling diatribe, accompanied by a professionally shot photo of her and Mark from their engagement session. They looked so happy, so in love. The image was a perfect lie. Her post was a masterpiece of manipulation. It began. With the heaviest of hearts, I have to share that what should have been the happiest day of our lives was systematically destroyed by the cruel and selfish actions of one person, Mark's mother. I felt the blood drain from my face as I read on. She painted a picture of a toxic, controlling monster. Me. She claimed I had a history of making everything about myself, that I was emotionally manipulative, and that I used money to control my son. She wrote that they had made the heartbreaking decision to set a boundary for their wedding day, asking me to respect their need for a stress-free environment. And in response, I had thrown a narcissistic tantrum and pulled the plug on everything out of pure spite. This wasn't about money, she wrote, the hypocrisy of it taking my breath away. It was about control. When a parent's love comes with conditions, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. We are devastated, but we are also free. Free from financial abuse, free from emotional blackmail. The post ended with a thank you to all the friends and family who had stayed to pick up the pieces, and a hashtag. #surviving narcissistic abuse. I scrolled down, my hand trembling. The post already had hundreds of likes and dozens of comments. They were a torrent of sympathy for Tiffany and venom for me. Tiffany, you are so brave for sharing this. Sending you love. I can't believe a mother would do that to her own child. Pure evil. Some people are just toxic. You're better off without her in your life. This is classic narcissistic personality disorder. I hope you cut her off completely. It was a public execution. My name, my reputation, built over a lifetime of teaching and community involvement, was being dragged through the mud by this conniving, deceitful woman. I felt sick. I was a 68-year-old widow, and I was being tried and convicted in the court of public opinion without a single person having heard my side of the story. By noon it had gotten worse. A local lifestyle blogger, a young woman with a popular Instagram page, had picked up the story. She wrote a sanctimonious article titled, "When a Mother's Love Has a Price Tag, A Local Bride's Wedding Day Nightmare." She quoted Tiffany's post extensively, adding her own armchair psychology about toxic family dynamics and the hidden scourge of parental financial abuse. My private pain had become a local spectacle, a cautionary tale for her followers. The phone started ringing. Old friends, neighbors, former colleagues. Some called to offer tentative support, their voices filled with confusion. Others called to scold me, telling me they were disappointed in my behavior. Each call was a fresh stab of pain. The worst part was Mark's silence. He didn't call. He didn't text. He was letting her narrative stand, letting the world believe I was this monster. He was a willing participant in my character assassination. That evening, it escalated to a level I never could have imagined. I was channel surfing trying to distract myself when I saw them. Mark and Tiffany, sitting on a couch on the local evening news. Tiffany was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, her face a mask of sorrow. Mark sat beside her, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders, his expression grim and solemn. "My mother has always had control issues," he said to the reporter, his voice heavy with fake regret. "We love her, but we knew that for our marriage to have a healthy start, we needed to establish some boundaries. We never thought she would react by sabotaging the entire day." Tiffany picked up the narrative, her voice cracking. "All we wanted was one day that was about our love. But when someone's love is conditional on them always getting their way, well, you see what happens." She gestured vaguely, as if to encompass the wreckage of their perfect day. "We're just trying to heal now, and start our life together, free from toxic influences." I switched off the TV, the reporter's sympathetic murmurs echoing in the silent room. I sat there in the dark, the screen a black mirror reflecting my own stunned face. They had taken my story, twisted it into a grotesque caricature, and broadcast it to the entire city. They weren't just trying to win an argument, they were trying to destroy me. It's a terrible feeling, isn't it? To have your own child, the person you poured your entire soul into, stand before the world and paint you as a villain. For any of you out there watching, who have felt that sting of betrayal from the one person who was supposed to be in your corner, who have been misunderstood and maligned by your own family, stick with me here. This is the point where I could have crawled into a hole and disappeared. This is the point where they thought they had won. But this is also the point where the teacher in me, the one who graded papers until 2 a.m. and never backed down from a challenge, woke up. They had started a war of words. They had no idea I was about to arm myself with something far more powerful. The truth. And receipts. They thought they had buried me. But they forgot one thing: I was a teacher for 40 years. I know how to do my homework. And I was about to give them a lesson they would never forget. The next morning, the fog of shock and grief had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. They had used social media as their weapon. Fine. My weapons would be older, more reliable. Facts, documents, and the simple, undeniable truth. My little condo, which had felt like a prison the day before, now became my command center. My first call was not to a friend, but to my lawyer. Arthur Jenkins had been my late husband's college roommate, and had handled our affairs for 30 years. He was semi-retired, mostly dealing with wills and estates, but I knew he was sharp, and more importantly, I knew I could trust him. "Arthur," I said, my voice crisp and clear, "I need your help. I'm being slandered, and I need to fight back." I spent 20 minutes laying out the entire sordid story, from the email to the TV interview. Arthur listened patiently, his only interruptions being quiet grunts of affirmation. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Carol," he said finally, his voice a low rumble of indignation. "This is despicable. This goes beyond a family squabble. This is a calculated attack. What do you need from me?" "I need you to be my lawyer officially," I said. "And I need you to start drafting letters. To the blogger who wrote that article, to the news station. We need to inform them that they are propagating a false and defamatory narrative, and that legal action will be forthcoming if they do not issue a retraction." I wanted to scare them, to make them realize they'd only heard one side of a very calculated story. "Consider it done," Arthur said. "What else?" "I'm going to war, Arthur. And I need ammunition." For the rest of the day, I became an archivist of my own life. I pulled out bank statements going back 3 years, highlighting every transfer to Mark. Money for his car repairs, help with his rent before he met Tiffany, the huge wire transfer for the down payment on their house. I found the receipts for his college textbooks that I'd paid for long after he'd graduated. It was an avalanche of financial support, a paper trail of my love and generosity. I laid them all out on my dining room table, a mosaic of sacrifice. Then I went through my emails and text messages. I found dozens. "Mom, my student loan payment is due, and I'm a little short this month. Can you help?" "Hey Mom, Tiffany really loves this couch, but it's more than we can afford. Would you be willing to help out as an early wedding present? Mom, the caterer needs another deposit. We don't get paid until Friday. You're a lifesaver. Message after message, a chronicle of their dependence and my willingness to give. I printed every single one. The pile of evidence grew. Then I thought about the wedding itself. Were there any other witnesses to their behavior? And then it hit me, Maria the florist. I remembered her kind eyes and the gentle way she'd spoken to me during our planning meetings. Tiffany had been dismissive, almost rude to her, snapping about the exact shade of white for the roses. I had been the one to smooth things over. I found her number on one of the invoices and dialed, my heart pounding a little. Would she even speak to me? Hello, Maria's Floral Designs. A familiar voice answered. Maria, hello. It's Carol Miller. There was a pause. Oh, Mrs. Miller, she said, her voice dropping. I saw the news. I am so sorry. It's just awful. Tears pricked my eyes at her simple, unsolicited kindness. Thank you, Maria. That means more than you know. I was calling because, well, I know it's a lot to ask, but I need to know if you would be willing to speak about your experience working with Tiffany. She didn't hesitate. Mrs. Miller, that woman was a nightmare. She treated my staff like servants. And there's something else. I wasn't sure if I should say anything. What is it? I asked, leaning forward. The day before the wedding, I was in the main hall setting up the centerpieces. She was on her phone talking to someone. She was laughing. I heard her say it as clear as day. She said, "The old fool just signed the final check for the flowers. Once it clears, we'll never have to speak to her again unless we need something." Then she said something about how you had a terrible sense of style, and she was glad you wouldn't be in the official photos. I closed my eyes, the confirmation of her cruelty a fresh wound. But it was also a gift. A witness. Maria, I asked, my voice trembling slightly, if it came to it, would you be willing to sign an affidavit stating what you heard? In a heartbeat, she said fiercely. What they're doing to you is wrong. My own mother went through a terrible divorce where her husband tried to paint her as crazy. I know what that looks like. I'm on your side. I had the bank statements. I had the text messages. I had the original email. And now I had a witness. I felt a surge of strength. I was no longer just a heartbroken mother. I was a woman with a case. But I still felt like I was missing a piece of the puzzle. The sheer viciousness of it all. It felt like more than just greed for a lavish wedding. Why did they need my money so badly that they were willing to orchestrate such a cruel public takedown? Why the desperate, failed attempt to get my power of attorney? The answer came that evening. My phone rang, displaying a blocked number. Normally I wouldn't answer, but something told me to. Picked it up. Hello. There was a hesitant silence. Then a woman's voice, trembling and rushed. Carol? It's Sharon. Sharon. My late husband's sister. Mark's aunt. We hadn't spoken in years, not since a falling out over Tom's will. She had always been a bit of a difficult person. Sharon. I said, stunned. What is it? I saw what they're doing to you, she whispered, her voice cracking. It's all over Facebook. It's disgusting. Carol, I have to tell you something. I wasn't going to get involved, but I can't. I can't live with myself if I don't. Tell me what? I asked, my blood turning to ice. I was at their house for dinner a few months ago. I overheard Mark and Tiffany talking in the kitchen. They thought I was in the bathroom. They were talking about you. She took a shaky breath. Carol, you need to know what they were really planning. It wasn't just about the wedding money. What do you mean it wasn't just about the wedding money? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I sank down into the armchair by the phone, a sudden cold dread seeping into my bones. Sharon took a deep, shuddering breath, the sound crackling over the line. They were talking about a business. Tiffany wants to open one of those high-end, snooty art galleries downtown. Apparently, it's been her dream forever. They needed a huge amount of capital to get it started, for the lease, the renovations, buying the initial inventory. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. My mind flashed back to all the little comments Tiffany had made over the years about her impeccable taste, and how the local art scene was so pedestrian. I had dismissed it as idle snobbery. They went to the banks, Carol, Sharon continued, her voice gaining a bit of angry momentum, and they were turned down. Flat out. Mark's credit is a mess from his 20s, and Tiffany has no real business experience. No bank would touch them without a substantial cosigner. Someone with significant assets and a perfect credit history. I didn't need her to say the next words. I already knew. You, she said softly. They needed you. I felt a wave of nausea. So the wedding? The wedding was phase 1, Sharon said, and the clinical nature of her words sent a chill down my spine. I heard them. Tiffany was laying it all out for Mark like a general planning a campaign. She called it emotional leveraging. Her words, Carol. She said that a big, lavish wedding paid for by you would create a sense of obligation. But they knew you'd never agree to co-sign on such a risky business venture outright. My head was spinning. This was a level of cold-blooded scheming I couldn't fathom. So what was their plan? I asked, my voice hoarse. It was monstrous, Sharon whispered. Phase 2 was the humiliation. Tiffany explained that by publicly banning you from the wedding, they would break you. She said, and I quote, "She's an old woman, she's lonely. Her son is her whole world. If we cut her out, she'll fall apart. She'll be so desperate to get back in his good graces, she'll do anything." I closed my eyes, the image of my smiling face on that security notice flashing in my mind. It wasn't just an act of cruelty. It was a strategic move. A tactic. They planned to let you suffer for a week or two, Sharon said, her voice thick with disgust. They expected you to be calling, crying, begging to know what you did wrong. Then Mark was supposed to step in. He would be the hero. He would tell you he'd had a long talk with Tiffany, and he had convinced her to forgive you and let you back into their lives. My stomach churned. It was a script, a sick, twisted play where I was the unwitting lead. And once you were full of gratitude and relief, Sharon's voice dropped even lower, once you were emotionally vulnerable, that's when they were going to present you with the loan documents for the gallery. They figured you'd be so thankful to have your son back that you wouldn't even read the fine print. You'd just sign. I thought of my son's face on the television, his arm around his weeping fiancée, talking about boundaries and toxic influences. He wasn't just lying. He was acting. He was playing his part. A horrifying thought struck me. The power of attorney, Sharon. A month ago they tried to get me to sign power of attorney. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Oh God, Carol. That was Plan B. Plan B. Yes, she said, her voice barely audible now. That was in case the humiliation tactic didn't work. In case you didn't break. Tiffany said if you got angry instead of sad, they would need another way. If you refused to sign for the loan, they were going to escalate things. Escalate how? I demanded, though I was terrified of the answer. They were going to start building a case, Sharon said, the words tumbling out in a rushed, horrified whisper. A case that you were becoming incompetent, mentally unfit to manage your own affairs. They were going to use your age against you. They would tell people you were becoming forgetful, erratic. Your reaction to the wedding, canceling the payments, they were going to twist that. See, they would say, she's not stable. She's having an episode. It's for her own good that we step in. The room tilted. I gripped the arm of the chair, my knuckles white. The papers they'd wanted me to sign. It wasn't about handling my bills in an emergency. It was about gaining control. It was about staging a coup. My son, my own son, was prepared to have me declared mentally incompetent, to strip me of my autonomy, my dignity, and my assets, all so his fiancée could have her vanity project. The pieces all fit together now. The public smearing wasn't just revenge for my canceling the payments. It was them executing Plan B. They were laying the groundwork, seeding the idea in the public mind that I was an unstable, narcissistic old woman. So when they eventually made their move to take control of my finances, people would nod and say, "Oh yes, that makes sense. We saw her on the news. Her poor son." The silence on the line stretched for a long time. I couldn't speak. I was choking on the sheer evil of it. "Carol? Are you still there?" Sharon asked timidly. "I'm here," I managed to say, my voice sounding like it belonged to a stranger. "Sharon, why are you telling me this? After all these years?" "Because my brother, your husband, was a good man," she said, her voice breaking. "And he would haunt me from his grave if I let his son do this to you. What they are doing is a sickness, Carol. I couldn't live with myself if I kept silent. I thanked her, my words feeling clumsy and inadequate. We hung up. I sat in my armchair in the gathering dusk, the shadows in my living room growing long and dark. The grief I'd felt was gone. The hurt was gone. The anger had burned itself out. All that was left was a terrifying, profound sense of clarity. This was never about a wedding. It was never about hurt feelings or family drama. This was a premeditated financial and psychological assault. My son and the woman he was supposed to marry were predators, and I was their prey. They wanted to declare me incompetent. They wanted to paint me as a crazy old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own mind. I stood up and walked over to my dining room table, where the stacks of evidence lay waiting. I ran my fingers over the bank statements, the printed emails, the notes from my call with Maria. They had underestimated me. They saw a grieving widow, a doting mother, an easy mark. They had forgotten I was also a teacher who had commanded classrooms of unruly teenagers for 40 years. They had forgotten I was a woman who had navigated widowhood and single motherhood with grace and strength. They had forgotten that I was a survivor. I picked up the phone and called Arthur. "Arthur," I said, my voice ringing with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. "The letters to the news station are a good start. But I have a better idea. I want you to call them back. Tell them I'm ready to give them an exclusive interview. On camera." They wanted a show? I was about to give them the performance of a lifetime. The news studio was smaller and colder than it looked on TV. The bright lights were hot on my face, and the 3 cameras looked like giant, unblinking insects. A young woman fussed with a microphone on my lapel, her touch gentle but impersonal. Across a small table, the same reporter who had interviewed Mark and Tiffany sat shuffling her papers. Her name was Sarah Chan, and she had the polished, vaguely predatory look of someone who smelled a good story. She had given my son that look of deep, empathetic concern. I wondered what look she had reserved for me, the villain of the piece. "Thank you for coming in, Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "As you know, your son and his fiancée shared a very powerful, very painful story with us. We're here today to give you a chance to respond." Her tone implied it was a generous offer, a chance for the condemned to say her last words. "Thank you for having me, Sarah," I replied, my voice even. I had dressed carefully for this. Not in a sad funereal color, but in a crisp cream-colored blazer. I looked like what I was. A retired professional, not a hysterical old woman. Beside my chair, I had a heavy, meticulously organized binder. Arthur had told me to let him handle it, but I knew I had to do this myself. "So," Sarah began, leaning forward, "your son described a long history of controlling behavior. He said the decision to exclude you from the wedding was a last resort, an act of self-preservation. How do you respond to that?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached down and lifted the heavy binder onto the table between us. I opened it with a decisive thump. It was filled with page protectors and color-coded tabs. The cameras instinctively zoomed in. "I'd like to respond with facts, Sarah," I said, meeting her gaze. "Words can be twisted. Feelings can be manipulated. But numbers, for the most part, tell a very straightforward story." I pulled out the first document. It was a bank statement. I had used a highlighter to mark a transfer of $50,000. "This," I said, sliding it across the table toward her, "is the down payment I made on Mark and Tiffany's house 2 years ago. I suppose you could call that controlling. Or you could call it a mother helping her son start his life." I pulled out another stack of papers. "These are the statements showing my payments for the remainder of Mark's college fund and student loans. Long after he graduated. A total of over $30,000. I guess that could be seen as financial manipulation. Or it could be seen as a mother wanting her child to be free from debt." I kept going, my voice calm and steady. I was a teacher giving a lecture, and the entire city was my classroom. I presented the receipts for his first car. The credit card statements showing where I'd paid his bills when he was in a tight spot. And finally, the thick folder with every single invoice for the wedding. I tapped the final invoice from the Napa resort. "And this is the final bill for the wedding they accused me of ruining. A wedding that, from the venue to the tiny sugar flowers on the cake, was funded entirely by me. The total cost was just over $150,000. Sarah was silent, looking down at the mountain of evidence. The polished mask was gone. She looked genuinely stunned. "Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice a little less smooth now. "This is extensive. But Tiffany and Mark claim this money always came with strings attached. That you used it to get your way." "Did they?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because I brought our text messages as well." I took out my phone, which I had connected to the studio's monitor. With the help of a technician before the show, I had prepared this. I showed them the screen. Message after message appeared. Mark asking for help. Tiffany hinting about an expensive honeymoon. Not once was there a demand from me. Not a single, "I'll pay for this if you do that." There was only my love and their taking. "Please, Sarah," I said, gesturing to the screen. "Show me the strings. Show me the manipulation." What you will find is a son who repeatedly asked for financial help, and a mother who repeatedly gave it, freely and without conditions. Then I leaned forward, my voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal. The only condition I ever had, a condition I thought was unspoken, was that I be treated with basic human decency and respect. A condition that was violated when my son allowed his fiancée to call me an old hag in an email, and then plotted to have me barred from the wedding like a common trespasser. I slid a crisp, clean copy of Tiffany's email across the table. "And I brought that too." The camera zoomed in on the highlighted sentence. I could imagine people all over the city leaning closer to their screens. The reporter read it, her eyes widening. For the first time, she looked completely off balance. "This," she stammered. "This paints a very different picture." "It does, doesn't it?" I said. "It paints a picture of a young couple who were happy to take my money, but embarrassed to have me present. And it gets worse. This was the moment. The final devastating blow. This wasn't just about a wedding, Sarah. This was a premeditated attempt to gain control of my entire estate. I have a sworn statement from a family member who overheard them planning it. I didn't name Sharon, wanting to protect her. They planned to humiliate me, break my spirit, and then when I was at my lowest, manipulate me into co-signing a massive business loan for Tiffany's vanity project. And if that didn't work, my voice was cold and hard now, their plan B was to build a case that I was mentally incompetent, so they could gain control of my assets through the courts. A collective gasp went through the studio crew behind the cameras. Sarah just stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. I looked directly into the main camera then, speaking not to the reporter, but to everyone watching at home. To the other mothers, the other widows, the other women who had given and given until there was nothing left. They tried to paint me as a manipulative, narcissistic mother. I said, my voice clear and strong. But what I am is a survivor. I am a 68-year-old woman who was targeted by my own son and his fiancée in a cruel plot to steal my life savings. Canceling the payments for that wedding wasn't an act of spite. It was an act of self-preservation. It wasn't me ruining their day. It was me taking back my life, my dignity, and my future. I leaned back in my chair. The binder lay open on the table, a testament to the truth. So yes, I concluded, looking back at the stunned reporter, I did stop the wedding, and I would do it again, because my love is not for sale, and my self-respect is not negotiable. The interview ended. The studio was silent except for the low hum of the equipment. I had laid all my cards on the table. Now all I could do was wait for their next move, and I didn't have to wait long. That night, my doorbell rang, frantic and insistent. The doorbell rang again, longer this time, a desperate, sustained buzz that grated on my nerves. I wasn't surprised. I had been expecting them. I walked calmly from my living room, the quiet tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall the only sound. I didn't rush. I let them wait. Through the peephole, I saw a pathetic tableau huddled on my porch. Mark was front and center, his face pale and blotchy, his hair a mess. Tiffany stood just behind him, her usual mask of arrogant beauty replaced by a pinched, frightened expression. And behind them, looking deeply uncomfortable, were her parents, Eleanor and Richard. A delegation of the damned. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door. I didn't open it all the way, just enough to block the entrance with my body. I said nothing. I just looked at them. Mom. Mark's voice broke on the single word. Tears were streaming down his face, but they didn't move me. They looked like the tears of a child who'd been caught, not the tears of a man who was truly sorry. Mom, please. Can we come in? We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, Mark, I said, my voice devoid of warmth. You said everything you needed to say on national television. That was a mistake, he cried, taking a step forward. I held my ground. Tiffany was upset. I was confused. We weren't thinking straight. We can fix this. We'll go back on the news. We'll post a retraction. We'll tell everyone it was a huge misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I repeated, the word tasting like poison. Was it a misunderstanding when you stood by and let your fiancé call me an old hag? Was it a misunderstanding when you put my picture on a security list? Or was it a misunderstanding when you plotted to have me declared mentally incompetent? The color drained from his face. Tiffany flinched as if I'd slapped her. Her mother, Eleanor, found her voice. Now, Carol, let's not be dramatic, she began, trying to summon some of her old condescending tone, but it came out weak and shaky. There were some unfortunate discussions. Plans made under stress. Nothing would have actually come of it. Really, Eleanor? I fixed my gaze on her. So the attempt to get me to sign over power of attorney was just a friendly chat? The public smear campaign was just a little tiff? Don't insult my intelligence. I've heard the whole plan. Tiffany finally spoke, her voice a desperate whine. It was the loan, Carol. The bank. They saw the interview. They pulled our pre-approval for the gallery. The vendors from the wedding are all threatening to sue us for the full amount. We're ruined. Ah, there it was. The real reason they were here. Not remorse. Desperation. Their carefully constructed future was crumbling, and they had come back to the bank, hoping for one more withdrawal. That sounds like a personal problem, I said flatly. Mark seemed to crumble. He sagged against the doorframe, his face a mask of utter defeat. Mom, please, he sobbed. I love you. I never wanted to hurt you. I was stupid. Tiffany gets these ideas and I go along. Please, Mom. You're the only one who can fix this. You can make it all go away. He looked at me then, his eyes full of the same childish pleading he'd used when he was 10 and had broken a neighbor's window with a baseball. He expected me to soothe him, to pay for the damages, to tell him everything would be okay. And in that moment, something inside me finally, irrevocably broke. It wasn't my heart. It was the chain of obligation that had bound me to him my entire life. I looked at my son, this weak, defeated man who had been willing to sacrifice his own mother for a shot at a life he hadn't earned, and I felt nothing. Not love, not hate. Just a vast, empty pity. The person who could fix this for you, Mark, I said, my voice soft but final. The woman who would have drained her accounts, mortgaged her home and fought dragons for you, she doesn't live here anymore. You and Tiffany killed her. She died in the parking lot of that resort when she realized her own son saw her as nothing more than an obstacle and a bank account. I stepped back and retrieved a manila envelope from the small table in my entryway. I held it out to him. You wanted me to sign papers, I said. These are the only papers I will ever be signing for you again. He took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a formal notice from my lawyer, a restraining order preventing him and Tiffany from contacting me, and a document officially disowning him, cutting him out of my will and my life, effective immediately. I am selling my condo, I announced, my voice ringing with newfound freedom. I'm going to travel. I'm going to see the world. I'm going to use my money, the money my husband and I worked our entire lives for, on myself. You wanted a life without my interference. Congratulations. You've got it. Tiffany let out a horrified gasp. Mark just stared at the papers, his face ashen. But we're family, he whispered, the words sounding hollow and meaningless. No, Mark, I said, looking at each of them one last time. You're a business partnership. I was your investor. And I am officially divesting. I gently closed the door on their stunned faces, shutting out their frantic protests. I leaned my back against the solid wood, and for the first time in a lifetime, I felt the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. The house was quiet. My house. My life. It was finally completely my own. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't an easy one to tell, but it's a journey that brought me to a place of peace and strength I never knew I had. My question for you all is this. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own peace and self-respect, even if it meant cutting ties with someone you loved? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your stories matter. And if my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more. You are not alone.